You guys are not going to believe what happened to me last week. My entire life got turned completely upside down when a billionaire CEO literally moved into my house and started living with me. And no, this isn't some romance novel fantasy. This actually happened in real life. Let me tell you everything from the beginning, because you absolutely need to hear this insane story. And I promise you, by the end of this, your jaw is going to be on the floor. It all started on a rainy Monday when I was coming home from work, completely exhausted after another terrible day at the office. I work as an administrative assistant at a small company, and, to be honest, I can barely pay my bills at the end of each month. My salary is pathetic. My boss treats me like garbage, and I've been living paycheck to paycheck for years now. I live in a simple little house that I inherited from my grandmother when she passed away 3 years ago. It's nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom cottage with outdated furniture and a kitchen that's probably older than I am. But it's my little corner of the world, and I love every inch of it. When I got home that day, completely drenched from running through the rain because my umbrella broke, I found a man in an expensive suit standing on my porch, looking even more soaked than I was. My first instinct was to grab my phone and call the police because, let's be honest, you don't expect to find strange men in $1,000 suits hanging around your modest neighborhood. But something about him made me hesitate. He looked lost, vulnerable, and when our eyes met through the rain, I saw a deep sadness that touched me in an inexplicable way. He introduced himself as Alexander Morrison, and the name sounded familiar, but I couldn't remember where I'd heard it before. His voice was deep and smooth, the kind of voice that commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar deals. But right now, it was shaky and uncertain. He explained that he had just gone through a terrible divorce and that his ex-wife had managed to get all of his properties temporarily through a complicated court injunction. He had nowhere to go, no access to his money, and he was literally standing in the rain with nothing but the clothes on his back. I know you guys must be thinking, I'm completely crazy for what I did next. But something inside me told me to trust him. Maybe it was the vulnerability in his eyes. Maybe it was the fact that he was clearly desperate. Or maybe it was just my grandmother's voice in my head telling me to always help people in need. Whatever it was, I invited him in for a hot cup of coffee and a chance to dry off. Comment below and let me know if you think I made the right decision, because what happened next changed absolutely everything. It was only when he took off his wet coat that I really paid attention to him. Alexander wasn't just handsome. He was absolutely stunning. Tall, probably 6'3", with dark hair that was perfectly styled, even after being caught in a downpour. Piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through me, and a smile that could melt any heart. His suit, even soaking wet, was obviously expensive, tailored to fit his athletic build perfectly. But what struck me most was how he carried himself. Even in his vulnerable state, there was an unmistakable air of confidence and power about him. While we sat in my small kitchen, wrapped in towels and sipping coffee from my mismatched mugs, he told me his story. Alexander is the CEO of Morrison Industries, one of the biggest tech companies in the country, with a net worth of over $3 billion. I nearly choked on my coffee when he told me this, because suddenly I remembered where I'd heard his name. He's been on the cover of Forbes magazine multiple times, featured in countless business articles, and his company's products are used by millions of people worldwide. But here's where the story gets absolutely insane, and I want you to tell me in the comments what you would have done in my situation. His ex-wife Victoria, who he described as a manipulative socialite he'd married 5 years earlier, had been plotting against him for months. She'd been working with his business rivals, gathering inside information, and building a case to destroy him financially and emotionally. She had convinced the judge that Alexander was hiding assets offshore and posed a flight risk. So all of all, his bank accounts were frozen. His $50 million penthouse was seized. His collection of luxury cars was impounded, and even his private jet was grounded. Can you imagine going from living in absolute luxury to being homeless in a single day? The man who could buy anything he wanted, who had multiple homes around the world, who employed thousands of people, was suddenly left with nothing but a few $100s in cash he kept in his wallet for emergencies. He told me he'd spent the previous 2 nights sleeping in his office, until security kicked him out when the building was locked down as part of the court order. As he told me his story, his voice breaking at certain parts, I could see the pain in his eyes, and something inside me just broke. Maybe it was because I knew what it felt like to struggle financially, or maybe it was because despite everything that had happened to him, he wasn't bitter or angry, just heartbroken and lost. When he asked if he could stay just one night until he figured out where to go, promising to pay me back as soon as his lawyers sorted everything out, I found myself saying yes before I could even think about the implications. One night turned into 2, then 3, and before I knew it, a week had passed, and Alexander Morrison, billionaire CEO, was living in my spare bedroom that I'd been using as storage for old boxes and my grandmother's sewing machine. The spare bed barely fit him. The ceiling was low, and he had to duck every time he walked through the doorway. But he never complained once. You guys, living with a billionaire is nothing like what you'd expect. And I mean absolutely nothing. The first morning, I woke up to the most incredible smell coming from my kitchen. I stumbled out of bed, still in my pajamas, expecting to find my house on fire, but instead found Alexander standing at my stove, wearing one of my grandmother's old aprons, cooking what looked like a gourmet breakfast that belonged in a 5-star restaurant. He had somehow transformed my basic ingredients, the sad collection of eggs, bacon, and bread that I'd been planning to turn into my usual boring breakfast, into something that looked like it should be photographed for a food magazine. There were perfectly plated eggs, Benedict with homemade hollandaise sauce, crispy bacon arranged artistically, fresh fruit cut into perfect pieces, and coffee that smelled better than anything I'd ever had from a coffee shop. When I asked him where he learned to cook like that, he smiled and told me that despite having personal chefs for years, he'd learned to cook during his college years when he was building his first startup and living on ramen noodles. He said cooking became his way of relaxing and that he'd never stopped loving it, even after he could afford to have meals prepared by world-class chefs. There was something incredibly sexy about watching this powerful businessman, still wearing his expensive dress shirt, but with the sleeves rolled up, moving confidently around my tiny kitchen like he belonged there. But here's what really shocked me, and let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced anything like this, because I'm still processing it all. Despite being used to luxury beyond imagination, Alexander adapted to my simple lifestyle without a single complaint. He helped with household chores. And I'm not talking about just picking up after himself. This man, who probably hadn't touched a vacuum cleaner in years, was deep cleaning my carpets like it was the most natural thing in the world. He insisted on paying for groceries, even though his cards were frozen, using the emergency cash he had hidden in his wallet, and he always bought way more than we needed, filling my refrigerator with fresh ingredients I'd never been able to afford. Most surprisingly, he seemed genuinely happy doing normal, everyday things with me. We'd watch movies on my old couch, the one with the springs that poke out and the cushions that have seen better days, and he'd act like it was the most comfortable place he'd ever sat. The second week brought unexpected challenges that I never saw coming, And that made me realize just how complicated his world really was. Alexander's ex-wife, Victoria, somehow found out where he was staying, and she started causing problems that turned my quiet life into absolute chaos. She called my work and tried to get me fired by claiming I was harboring a criminal and helping him hide assets from the court. My boss, Mr. Peterson, called me into his office and grilled me for an hour about my relationship with Alexander, threatening to terminate my employment if I was involved in anything illegal. Victoria sent private investigators to watch my house, and suddenly there were strange cars parked on my street at all hours, men with cameras taking pictures of everyone who came and went. My neighbors started asking questions, and I could see them whispering and pointing whenever I left for work. The peaceful anonymity I'd always enjoyed was completely shattered, and I was getting a taste of what it meant to be connected to someone in the public eye. She even had the audacity to show up at my door one afternoon, and let me tell you, seeing her in person was like witnessing a master manipulator in action. Victoria was everything I wasn't: tall and elegant, with perfect blonde hair, designer clothes that probably cost more than I made in 6 months, and the kind of confidence that comes from a lifetime of privilege. She demanded to see Alexander, claiming she needed to discuss their divorce settlement. But I could see right through her act when Alexander came to the door. The confrontation that followed was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. Victoria's sweet, concerned wife act disappeared instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating woman who spoke to him like he was something she'd scraped off her shoe. She threatened him, told him that she'd make sure he never got his money back, and promised that she'd destroy anyone who helped him. But you know what? Seeing how she treated someone who was already down made me realize exactly what kind of person she was, and it made me more determined than ever to stand by Alexander. Living with him also meant dealing with the daily reality of his business empire falling apart while he was powerless to stop it. Every day, he would get dozens of calls from board members, investors, employees, and business partners who were panicking about the company's future. Morrison Industries stock was plummeting. Major deals were falling through, and competitors were swooping in to steal clients and employees. I watched this incredibly successful man, someone who was used to controlling every aspect of his business, try to run a billion-dollar corporation from my living room, using my old laptop that took 5 minutes to boot up and had a screen with a crack down the middle. He'd spend hours on video calls, trying to reassure investors and keep his company together, while sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by my grandmother's old china and the stack of bills I hadn't gotten around to paying. It was heartbreaking, but also inspiring to see how he never gave up, even when everything seemed hopeless. He worked 18-hour days, barely stopping to eat, surviving on coffee and determination. There were nights when I'd find him asleep at the kitchen table, his head resting on financial reports and legal documents, still wearing the same clothes from the day before. The turning point came during the 3rd week, and this is where the story gets absolutely wild, in ways I never could have imagined. Alexander's lawyer, a sharp woman named Sarah Chen, who'd been working around the clock to prove his innocence, finally managed to uncover the evidence they needed. It turned out that Victoria hadn't just been plotting against Alexander. She'd been orchestrating an elaborate conspiracy that involved multiple people and went deeper than anyone had realized. Not only was she having an affair with Marcus Webb, the CEO of Alexander's biggest rival company, Technova Industries, but they had been planning for over a year to destroy Morrison Industries so they could buy it for pennies on the dollar once it collapsed. They had planted spies in Alexander's company stolen proprietary information, sabotaged major deals, and even bribed several board members to vote against Alexander's initiatives. The evidence was overwhelming and included recorded phone conversations, email exchanges, bank records showing payments to the bribed board members, and testimony from whistleblowers who had finally decided to come forward. Victoria had been so confident in her plan that she'd gotten sloppy, leaving a trail of evidence that painted a clear picture of fraud, conspiracy, industrial espionage, and a dozen other serious crimes. When Sarah presented this evidence to the court, the judge was so outraged by the scope of the conspiracy that he immediately reversed all the injunctions, unfroze Alexander's accounts, and ordered Victoria and her co-conspirators to be investigated by both state and federal authorities. Within 24 hours, Alexander went from sleeping in my spare bedroom to having access to his billions again, and Victoria went from living in his penthouse to facing the possibility of decades in prison. But here's the thing that completely blew my mind, and I want you guys to tell me what you would have done in this situation, because I honestly didn't see it coming. Instead of immediately moving back to his penthouse and returning to his old life of luxury and power, Alexander asked if he could stay with me, not just for a few more days while he got his affairs in order, but permanently, as in making my little house our home together. He told me that the 3 weeks he'd spent living in my house had been the happiest he'd been in years, possibly ever. He said that for the first time since building his empire, he felt like he was living an authentic life, surrounded by genuine care, rather than people who only wanted something from him. He talked about how much he loved our simple morning routines, cooking breakfast together, watching the news while drinking coffee from my mismatched mugs, and how peaceful it felt to come home to someone who cared about him as a person rather than as a bank account. Alexander offered to buy me a mansion, to pay off all my debts, to give me anything I wanted. But all he asked for in return was to continue sharing a life with me in whatever way I was comfortable with. He said he wanted to renovate my house, turn it into our dream home, while keeping the charm and character that made it special. He wanted to set up a home office so he could work remotely more often, and he even talked about converting the garage into a proper kitchen so he could pursue his passion for cooking. I was completely overwhelmed and told him I needed time to think about such a life-changing decision. How do you process something like that? One day you're struggling to pay rent and wondering how you're going to afford groceries. And the next day, a billionaire who could have anyone in the world is asking to build a life with you in your grandmother's old house. The practical part of my brain was screaming that this was too good to be true, but my heart was telling me that what we had built together over those 3 weeks was real and special. During his time with me, I had seen Alexander at his lowest point, stripped of everything that defined him in the eyes of the world, and he had seen me at mine too, dealing with my financial struggles and my fears about the future. We had supported each other through incredibly difficult times, shared simple meals that somehow tasted better than any fancy restaurant food, watched old movies on my couch while eating popcorn, and talked for hours about our dreams, our fears, our childhoods, and what we wanted from life. There was something beautiful and pure about how we connected when all the wealth and status was stripped away, when it was just two people being genuinely human with each other. I learned that underneath the billionaire CEO exterior, Alexander was actually quite shy and introverted, that he loved reading mystery novels, that he'd always wanted to learn how to garden, and that his biggest fear was dying alone and unloved despite all his success. He learned that I'd always dreamed of traveling the world, but had never been able to afford it, that I loved painting but had given it up because I couldn't afford supplies, and that I sometimes felt invisible. In a world that seemed to only value people for what they could produce or achieve, we fit together in a way that surprised both of us, complementing each other's strengths and supporting each other's vulnerabilities. But the story doesn't end there, because life is never that simple. And Alexander's return to power meant that our little bubble of normalcy was about to burst in spectacular fashion. Suddenly, my house was surrounded by security guards. Black SUVs lined my street, and I couldn't step outside without being followed by bodyguards. Reporters were calling my phone non-stop, somehow getting my number and asking invasive questions about my relationship with Alexander and what it was like to live with him during his legal troubles. Everyone wanted to know about the mysterious woman who had helped the billionaire CEO during his darkest hour. Business magazines wanted to interview me about Alexander's character and his fitness to lead his company. Gossip columns were speculating about our relationship, making up stories about how we met and whether we were secretly engaged. Complete strangers were offering me money for exclusive details about our time together, and I was getting friend requests from people I'd never met who somehow knew everything about my life. The attention was overwhelming and frankly terrifying for someone like me who was used to living a quiet, private life. I'd never been photographed by paparazzi, never had my personal information dissected in public, never had strangers analyzing my appearance and speculating about my motives. Alexander tried his best to protect me from the media circus, hiring security for me and having his legal team send cease and desist letters to the most aggressive outlets. But it was impossible to completely shield me from the consequences of his fame. It was a harsh reminder that dating a billionaire means your life is no longer entirely your own, that every decision you make becomes public property, and that people will always question whether your feelings are genuine or financially motivated. The pressure reached a breaking point when Alexander's board of directors called an emergency meeting to discuss their concerns about his judgment and stability. Some investors were worried that his personal life was affecting his business decisions, and there were whispers about whether he was fit to continue leading the company. They pointed to his decision to stay in my modest house rather than return to his penthouse as evidence that he wasn't thinking clearly. They questioned whether his relationship with me, someone so far outside their social and economic circle, represented a liability to the company's reputation and stock price. Alexander was faced with an impossible choice between his business empire, which he had spent decades building and which employed thousands of people, and his personal happiness with me. I could see the stress eating away at him as he tried to balance the demands of his position with his desire for a normal, authentic relationship. He was losing weight, barely sleeping, and the easy happiness he'd found during our quiet weeks together was being replaced by the familiar tension and pressure of his high-stakes world. That's when I made a decision that surprised both of us and changed the entire trajectory of our relationship. Instead of asking him to choose between me and his company, instead of demanding that he prove his love by giving up his life's work, I told him that we needed to find a way to make both work. I suggested that if he truly wanted to be with me, we needed to build something together that could withstand the pressures of his public life and his professional responsibilities. I wasn't interested in being someone's secret or someone's weakness, hidden away from the parts of his life that mattered. I wanted to be his partner in every sense of the word, someone who could stand beside him in boardrooms and at charity galas, someone who could support his work while maintaining my own identity and values. I told him that if we were going to make this work, I needed to understand his world, and he needed to continue respecting mine. So Alexander started teaching me about his business, explaining the intricacies of running a tech empire, introducing me to key members of his team, and including me in strategic discussions about the company's future. He hired tutors to help me learn about finance, technology, and business management. Not because he wanted to change me, but because he wanted me to be able to engage with his world on equal footing. At the same time, he made changes to his own life and business practices that showed his commitment to the values we'd discovered during our time together. He implemented new policies at Morrison Industries, focused on work-life balance for employees, started a foundation to help people facing financial hardship due to legal battles, and began working from home several days a week so we could maintain the domestic routines that had brought us so much joy. The media attention gradually died down as other stories took precedence, and we settled into a new normal that blended elements of both our worlds. Alexander renovated my house, but he did it thoughtfully, preserving everything that made it special while adding modern conveniences and security features. He converted the garage into a professional kitchen where he could pursue his passion for cooking. And he built a home office where he could work without having to choose between his career and our relationship. We started traveling together, combining his business trips with my dreams of seeing the world. He showed me his favorite cities and introduced me to his international business partners, while I helped him discover the joy of traveling without a strict itinerary, of exploring local markets and small restaurants instead of always staying in luxury hotels and eating at Michelin-starred establishments. I also started pursuing my own passions again, using the financial security that came with our relationship to return to painting and even opening a small art studio in town. Alexander was my biggest supporter, attending every local art show and proudly displaying my paintings in his office at Morrison Industries headquarters. He often said that my art reminded him of the beauty and authenticity he'd discovered during those 3 weeks when he had nothing but found everything he truly needed. Our relationship faced plenty of challenges as we learned to navigate the complexities of combining such different backgrounds and lifestyles. There were times when the pressure of his public life felt overwhelming, when I questioned whether I was strong enough to be with someone whose every move was scrutinized by the media and the business world. There were also times when Alexander struggled with the slower pace of our life together, when his instinct to solve problems with money clashed with my desire to handle things ourselves. But through it all, we kept coming back to what we'd discovered during those first 3 weeks together, the deep connection and genuine care that had brought us together when everything else was stripped away. We learned to communicate better, to support each other's dreams while maintaining our individual identities, and to build a partnership that was stronger than the sum of its parts. Looking back now, 6 months after that rainy Monday, when a desperate billionaire showed up on my porch, I can honestly say that inviting Alexander into my home was the best decision I ever made. Not because of the financial security or the luxury that came with being in his life, but because we found something together that neither of us had been able to find alone. Living with Alexander taught me that love doesn't always look like what you expect, that sometimes the most unexpected circumstances can lead to the most beautiful connections, and that real partnership means supporting each other through both struggles and success. It showed me that genuine connection transcends social and economic differences, and that two people who are willing to be vulnerable and authentic with each other can build something extraordinary together. What do you think about this whole incredible journey? Have you ever had someone completely unexpected walk into your life and change everything? Have you ever taken a chance on someone who seemed too good to be true, but turned out to be exactly what you needed? Let me know in the comments, because I absolutely love hearing your stories. And your experiences might help other people who are facing similar decisions. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more updates about this crazy adventure I'm on with my former homeless billionaire turned life partner. Because trust me, this story is far from over. We're still writing new chapters every day, still learning how to blend our different worlds, and still discovering new things about each other and about what it means to build a life together. Thank you so much for following along on this incredible journey, and I can't wait to share what happens next.